everybody. So I know I haven't made like a YouTube video in a really long time, but I wanted to, whenever it was on my mind in a long-term format, I always like to talk to you guys through this outlet. It has been a long time, but today I want to talk about why I learned Hindi at 22 years old, and I thought this deserved a long-form video because it's not exactly a short story. It's a story I've been wanting to tell for a very long time now, so bear with me. And I hope you enjoy and hope this inspires you if you're thinking about learning Hindi or any other cultural language you might be attached to in some format, that it sort of inspires you to take those first steps. I guess I'll just start with in childhood. Basically, the number one reason why I learned Hindi like anybody else learns any other language is because I didn't know, and that not knowing of an entire world out there that I had no comprehension of was just nagging at me for a very long time. It was like it was triggering my intuition basically. So just a little background on me. My name is Meera. I'm 23 years old. I live in New York City. I graduated from Columbia University last year, and I am half American and half Indian. And throughout my whole life, my whole childhood, I've been visiting India almost every single year, sometimes twice a year, to visit my family, my friends, my relatives. My dad was born and brought up in India, so a lot of my family still lived there, particularly around like my adolescence, my growing up. So every single year I take that journey from Louisville, Kentucky to Dehradun, Uttarakhand, and it's in a totally different world, and I really don't know how to explain India to somebody who's never been because I've been going since I was a child. But I would say the vibrancy of the people there changes your outlook on life, at least that's what I've heard from like other Americans who have gone there without having a family connection. And of course the spirituality, which is another topic I'll touch on another time. But I do consider myself extremely blessed and grateful that I have been able to visit this country and sort of call it my second home for the entirety of my life. Like, I moved probably 11 or 12 times to different houses before I was 18, but my house in Dehradun, my grandmother's house in Dehradun, has stayed the same consistently. So it's the only place where I have childhood living memories at. So, but going there almost every year, I'm not able to speak to anybody that is surrounding me. Like, of course, my immediate family speaks English, and particularly very well, but the people that are just like in your day-to-day interactions, I have no idea what they're saying. I'd rely on my dad or my aunt or my grandmother to constantly translate for me. And at home, I think English mixture is probably what's most comfortable for people to speak. And I would just always be left out of the conversation or not knowing what's going on. And it just always, like, there was something in me that wanted to know more, that wanted to know the full story. Looking outside and seeing everything written in characters and not even being able to say like, hi, how are you? I actually didn't know how are you, aap kaise ho, until 2022, the summer before I learned Hindi. And even with that being said, I wouldn't even know how to respond. I remember as I just came back from India a few days ago, and I was reflecting on like the last time I went to India in 2022, and someone, I could say aap kaise ho, and I was asked that, but I did not know how to respond. I would just be like, thumbs up, like, okay, that type of thing. So that sort of brings me to my journey of learning Hindi, and it actually had 3 different times. So when a lot of people ask me like, how do I learn Hindi? I get a lot of DMs, which I'm very gracious about. For me, it's a continuing journey. Learning a language that's not your own, especially when you learn in your early 20s, is going to be a continuing journey, especially when that's not spoken in your day-to-day life, as I am living in New York City. So my first roundabout with Hindi actually happened during COVID in 2020. So I was living in Louisville, Kentucky at the time, and I had taken like these online lessons from a family friend who I'm very grateful for because it gave me like a subliminal foundation for like the words. I was able to keep up with it for a little bit, but unfortunately I fell off when my college started up again, and I sort of like wasn't able to sort of put the words and the format together in a way that in a more immersive environment would have offered me to. So then I go back to school. I actually moved to New York that summer, and I'm just like so distracted with, moving to New York, doing this or that like I'm not able to dedicate myself fully to my Hindi studies as one needs to do to fully immerse themselves in the language and get the hang of it. So then towards the first spring of 2022, I get the idea to take Hindi lessons at Columbia, at my undergraduate college. This was offered. At this point, I'd already fulfilled my language requirement through a transfer credit of Spanish, which I guess is a story for a different time. But so this was purely an elective class for me. So that fall, I began Hindi classes, and very soon I realized how intensive this program is. A lot of the people in the class obviously had both Indian parents, and even if they didn't know the language, at least just like spoken around at home and everything like that. But for me, I had one parent who doesn't know the language at all. So it was very difficult to not even to be actually behind most of the class at the time. Despite that, at the same time, it was an extremely intensive course. I love my professor, but that was an extremely intensive course for somebody who had literally no understanding. And honestly, when I looked at the class description, I did not realize that it also included writing and reading and characters. So that was kind of on me. And I was the worst student in the class by far. Like, no joke, I was. I had many quizzes that I failed, to be honest. And part of me wishes that I didn't take it in a college environment at that point, but I passed it, so it's okay. But it literally forced me to be immersed in Hindi all of the time, every single time. So went from not knowing even how to say "aapke se ho main theek hu" type of thing, to writing full-on sentences and characters, to watching a video in Hindi and answering it in characters, to speaking and then answering those questions also in characters, to learning the entire alphabet from scratch after never knowing a single character in my life, to then absorbing all of it and then learning context and learning how things interact with each other. And it was extremely, extremely intensive for my fall my senior year at college. At the same time though, the rewards were so immense. Like, while I struggled through the class up until that final point where I knew I passed the class, I just saw like the way that my life was in such a different perspective at the same time. Like, there's sort of like an awakening or an enlightenment that was happening. Being from middle America, Kentucky, as someone who is Indian American, there's a bit of a struggle. There's not a lot of, I didn't grow up in a huge Indian community. I did dancing in college. I did Bhangra for a solid 2 weeks and then Bollywood fusion for another semester. But I never fully I only understood my identity from an Indian American lens instead of an Indian lens. And I think those are two very different things that I love to talk on a different basis. But I understood context for my culture in ways that I wouldn't have understood before. And that's what it brings me to my next point of understanding it from an inside out perspective instead of an outside in. So when we learn from a cultural, anthropological perspective from an outside in, we're looking at it almost like an anthropologist. We're looking like, we're learning a very translated, diluted version of what's actually being said and why things are the way they are, why we might practice one thing, we might understand one thing, we watch a movie, watch the subtitles on. So I think that's a good metaphor that I like to use is like watching movie subtitles on versus just watching the movie in the actual language. So when you're watching subtitles on, this is how I was before I learned Hindi. It was very much like a translated version. I would like constantly put it into like American terms or English terms in ways that the only framework that I had for understanding. And so like the movie would still like be great, but it wasn't how it was created to be. And as I learned Hindi, well, I still use subtitles now, but when I was learning Hindi, I understood the movie without the subtitles. I focused more on what the characters had to say, aka the people in my life. I understood that some words cannot be translated. Meaning of a word, how we say words, our emotions, that cannot be translated. As much as we can strictly translate English to Hindi, Hindi to English, and that's the way I learned because, again, I only had the framework for English at the time. Ultimately, the way that linguistically, the way we say words and the order that we say them does matter. For example, in Hindi, the order is a little bit opposite. It's sort of like Spanish, where you say zindagi achi hai, life good is, where you would say life is good in English. And sometimes you flip it, which gets quite complicated. But ultimately, I learned so much about what it means to be Indian, what it means to be Indian American. Just really dive deep into that part of my life that I identify with the most. So that was honestly a really rewarding experience. And even though I didn't feel it at the time, when I went to India this past time, this was the first time I saw the world. My eyes were like open all of the time because I saw the country that I've known and that I've called somewhat home my entire life and the way that it was created to be. And before, I only learned that like diluted version, or I would be running to my dad, like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And at this time, I could have full-on conversations with people I've known since the day I was born by myself. And of course, I do need help. And of course, like, my grammar is so bad and my writing is not as good as it used to because I'm not practicing heavily anymore. But I was able to connect with people. I was able to form a sentence and say my first words to people that I've never talked to before, but I've only seen. And that sort of level of understanding is one that makes all of that sort of early on struggle worth it to me, and especially someone who works in the journalism industry and works in the travel and politics, that sort of thing. I've always had a curiosity for human beings. It just opens so many doors for me. And, you know, I take it down to like one specific moment at the airport when I was getting ready to leave. And this was the first time I traveled to India alone, by the way, as well, even though my family is there. This one woman was asking me in Hindi, "Are you Punjabi?" And I said, "Main Punjabi hu, lekin me mom American hai." And of course it was broken, and I was so nervous because in the previous life I would have just ran away saying, I don't know Hindi, I don't know Hindi, I don't know English. And I wouldn't have been able to talk to this woman for probably 5 minutes, even though I was constantly translating in my head, what is she saying, what she's saying, and then putting together the contextual clues to respond. And I think I'm like particularly hard on myself because I'm not that good, obviously. And my accent is horrendous and the grammar is 50-50 wrong. At the same time though, it is 50-50 wrong after not knowing a single word 2 years ago is a plethora of progress that I have yet to comprehend how much I truly know. Like when I was in Delhi, I watched an entire movie in Hindi with no subtitles and I loved it. So, and having those like little conversations with people made it like I nearly cried because like that for me is something that is so worth it. And particularly if someone are looking to embark on this journey that you don't have, your family didn't speak it at home, etc., and you're just learning for the first time, whether your circumstances were like mine and you were in Kentucky or somewhere else or something else, taking like action on your own life and saying, you know what, this is something I want to do and I will do it at all costs. I'm going to be persistent about it. That's what makes it even more rewarding than it's if I even was growing up with the language at all. And so yeah, that's sort of my Hindi journey. Let me know if you have any questions, and maybe we'll make a part 2 and like talk about where my Hindi is now. But yeah, thanks guys.